Web of Debt by Ellen Brown. Introduction. Captured by the Debt Spider. Through a network of anonymous financial spider webbing, only a handful of global king bankers own and control it all. Everybody, people, enterprise, state, and foreign countries all have become slaves, chained to the bankers' credit ropes. Hans Schicht, The Death of Banking, February 2005. President Andrew Jackson called the banking cartel a hydra-headed monster eating the flesh of the common man. New York Mayor John Hyland, writing in the 1920s, called it a giant octopus that seizes in its long and powerful tentacles our executive officers, our legislative bodies, our schools, our courts, our newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. The debt spider has devoured farms, homes, and whole countries that have become trapped in its web. In The Death of Banking, financial commentator Hans Schicht states that he had an opportunity in his career to observe the wizards of finance as an insider at close range. Their game, he says, has gotten so centralized and concentrated that the greater part of U.S. banking and enterprise is now under the control of a small inner circle of men. He calls the game spiderwebbing. Its rules include making any concentration of wealth invisible, exercising control through leverage, mergers, takeovers, change shareholdings where one company holds shares of other companies, conditions annexed to loans, and so forth. Exercising tight personal management and control with a minimum of insiders and frontmen who themselves have only partial knowledge of the game. Dr. Carroll Quigley was a writer and professor of history at Georgetown University, where he was President Bill Clinton's mentor. Professor Quigley wrote from personal knowledge of an elite clique of global financiers bent on controlling the world. Their aim, he said, was nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements. He called this clique simply the international bankers. Their essence was not race, religion, or nationality, but was just a passion for control over other humans. The key to their success was that they would control and manipulate the money system of a nation while letting it appear to be controlled by the government. The international bankers have succeeded in doing more than just controlling the money supply. Today, they actually create the money supply, while making it appear to be created by the government. This devious scheme was revealed by Sir Josiah Stamp, director of the Bank of England and the second richest man in Britain in the 1920s. Speaking at the University of Texas in 1927, he dropped this bombshell. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of the pen they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them, and all great fortunes like mine will disappear, for then this would be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue to be the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. Professor Henry C.K. Liu is an economist who graduated from Harvard and chaired a graduate department at UCLA before becoming an investment advisor for developing countries. He calls the current monetary scheme a cruel hoax. When we wake up to that fact, he says, our entire economic worldview will need to be reordered, just as physics was subject to reordering when a man's worldview changed with the realization that the earth is not stationary, nor is it the center of the universe. The hoax is that there is virtually no real money in the system, only debts, except for coins, which are issued by the government and make up only about 1/1000th of the money supply. The entire U.S. money supply now consists of debt to private banks for money they created with accounting entries on their books. It is all done by sleight of hand, and like a magician's trick, we have to see it many times before we realize what is going on. But when we do, it changes everything. All of history has to be rewritten. The following chapters track the web of deceit that has engulfed us in debt and present a simple solution that could make the country solvent once again. It is not a new solution, but dates back to the Constitution. The power to create money needs to be returned to the government and the people it represents. The federal debt could be paid, income taxes could be eliminated, and social programs could be expanded, and this could all be done without imposing austerity measures on the people or sparking runaway inflation. Utopian as that may sound, it represents the thinking of some of America's brightest and best, historical and contemporary, including Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. Among other arresting facts explored in this book are that the Federal Reserve is not actually federal. It is a private corporation owned by a consortium of very large multinational banks, Chapter 13. Except for coins, the government does not create money. Dollar bills, Federal Reserve notes, are created by private Federal Reserve, which lends them to the government, Chapter 2. Tangible currency, coins and dollar bills, together make up less than 3% of the U.S. money supply. The other 97% exists only as data entries on computer screens, and all of this money was created by banks in the form of loans, Chapters 2 and 17. The money that banks lend is not recycled from pre-existing deposits. It is new money, which did not exist until it was lent, Chapters 17 and 18. 30% of the money created by banks with accounting entries is invested for their own accounts, Chapter 18. The American banking system, which at one time extended productive loans to agriculture and industry, has today become a giant betting machine. An estimated $370 trillion are now riding on complex, high-risk bets known as derivatives, 28 times the $13 trillion annual output of the entire U.S. economy. These bets are funded by big U.S. banks and are made largely with borrowed money created on a computer screen. Derivatives can be and have been used to manipulate markets, loot businesses, and destroy competitor economies, Chapters 20 and 32. The U.S. federal debt has not been paid off since the days of Andrew Jackson. Only the interest gets paid, while the principal portion continues to grow, Chapter 2. The federal income tax was instituted specifically to coerce taxpayers to pay the interest due to the banks on the federal debt. If the money supply had been created by the government rather than borrowed from banks that created it, the income tax would have been unnecessary, Chapters 13 and 43. The interest alone on the federal debt will soon be more than the taxpayers can afford to pay. When we can't pay, the Federal Reserve's debt-based dollar system must collapse, Chapter 29. Contrary to popular belief, creeping inflation is not caused by the government irresponsibly printing dollars. It is caused by banks expanding the money supply with loans, Chapter 10. Most of the runaway inflation seen in banana republics has been caused not by national governments overprinting money, but by global institutional speculators attacking local currencies and devaluing them on international markets, Chapter 25. The same sort of speculative devaluation could happen to the U.S. dollar if international investors were to abandon it as a global reserve currency, something they are now threatening to do in retaliation for what they perceive to be American economic imperialism, Chapters 29 and 37. There is a way out of this morass. The early American colonists found it, and so did Abraham Lincoln and some other national leaders. The government can take back the money issuing power from the banks, Chapters 8 and 24. The bankers' Federal Reserve notes and the government's coins represent two separate money systems that have been competing for dominance throughout recorded history. At one time, the right to issue money was the sovereign right of the king, but that right got usurped by private money lenders. Today, the sovereigns are the people, and the coins that make up less than 1/1000th of the money supply are all that are left of our sovereign money. Many nations have successfully issued their own money, at least for a time, but the bankers' debt money has generally infiltrated the system and taken over in the end. These concepts are so foreign to what we have been taught that it can be hard to wrap our minds around them, but the facts have been substantiated by many reliable authorities. To cite a few, Robert A. Hemphill, credit manager of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, wrote in 1934, "We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation.